Welcome to the Hindu Daily. We've got a really packed deep dive for you today. We're looking at everything from global politics and legal battles to, well, quantum physics. Our mission is to really pull out the key insights. So let's jump right in. We're starting with some pretty uncomfortable questions being asked about the Indian Embassy's work in Washington, D.C. It looks like the Ministry of External Affairs is facing some heat over unusual tasks outsourced to an American lobby firm, SHW LLC.
And what's interesting here is that on the surface, this is completely normal. Hiring lobby groups, what everyone just calls Caste, is standard procedure for embassies.
Right.
India's been doing it for decades, since 1949, hiring dozens of firms.
Yeah.
So the issue isn't that they hired someone. It's about who they hired and what they were asked to do. Some of these tasks seem to cross a line from lobbying into, well, outsourcing core diplomacy.
And this really became visible after the change in administration in the U.S. in 2025. India had been working with firms like the Republican-linked BGR and the Democrat-linked Cornerstone, but then they hired 3 more.
And 2 of them are very closely tied to Trump associates. You've got Mercury Public Affairs, where the White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles was co-chair.
And SHW LLC, which is led by former Trump spokesperson Jason Miller. And that was a big contract, right? Something like $1.8 million.
$150,000 a month. And the reason we know all this is because of the FARA filings, the Foreign Agents Registration Act. It forces these firms to publicly detail what they do for foreign governments.
Which is how this all came to light.
Exactly. SHW's filing in December 2025 was unusual. It detailed about 60 different contacts with top Trump administration officials, starting right after the Pahalgam terror attack in April 2025. And the focus was squarely on the India-Pakistan conflict, Operation Sindoor.
This is where that line between diplomacy and outsourcing gets really blurry. The filings showed Jason Miller making 4 calls on May 10th, the very day the ceasefire was announced.
Calls to the White House and one to the U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer to discuss media coverage of Operation Sindoor.
Which is strange because at the same time, the MEA was denying that Trump had anything to do with mediating the end of the conflict. This feels less like advocacy and more like narrative management.
It absolutely does. And the other tasks they listed really cement that. They weren't just lobbying on trade bills. They were fixing meetings for people like Foreign Minister Jaishankar and Foreign Secretary Misri with top U.S. leaders.
Like Vice President J.D. Vance.
And the CIA chief. These are meetings that career diplomats would normally spend weeks, if not months, setting up. And maybe the most unconventional task. They were asked to flag Prime Minister Modi's social media posts praising Trump directly to the White House.
Wow. That is very transactional.
It's influence peddling, really. And at the same time, you have Pakistan retaining at least 6 firms, spending about $600,000 a month, 2 or 3 times what India was paying, to push their side of the story on Operation Sindoor and Kashmir.
So the big question for you, the listener, is what did we get for that money? The MEA says it's standard practice, but the results seem mixed.
Very mixed. You have conflicting narratives on who ended the conflict. The U.S. still imposed tariffs on Russian oil that India was lobbying against. And that big trade deal is still not finalized. It really suggests a shift where direct influence is being prioritized over traditional process-driven diplomacy.
Okay, speaking of how power and definitions shape policy, let's bring it back home and look at a major Supreme Court ruling on the limits of dissent under the UAPA.
Yes, this is a really crucial one, delivered January 5th in the 2020 Delhi riots conspiracy case. The court denied bail to Umar Khalid and Shurjeel Imam, even though they've been in jail for nearly 6 years now without a trial.
So the court's stance was pretty firm.
Very firm. They essentially said that personal liberty is fundamental, yes, but it doesn't override the incredibly stringent bail requirements under the UAPA. Section 43DA5 basically means the court has to believe the charges are, on the face of it, untrue before it can even consider granting bail, which is an extremely high bar.
But it wasn't a blanket denial for everyone involved, which I think is a key point here. The court did grant bail to 5 co-accused. So how did they draw that line? They created this hierarchy of participation.
Exactly. The court put Khalid and Imam on a qualitatively different footing. The prosecution's argument, which the court accepted, was that they were the ideological drivers, the ones who came up with a strategy to turn the anti-CAA protests into these disruptive road blockades, the chaka jams, to paralyze the capital.
So they were seen as the masterminds.
Yes, central to the conspiracy. The other 5, in contrast, were seen as local-level facilitators. Their roles were derivative, just managing logistics on the ground. The court decided that keeping them in custody any longer would be disproportionate. It's a clear line between the planners and the foot soldiers.
Which brings us to the speedy trial argument. 6 years is a long time. Surely the defense must have brought up that 2021 K.A. Najib ruling, the one that said prolonged custody could sort of melt down the strict UAPA rules.
They did, and this is where you see the real judicial tension. The defense argued that this indefinite detention violates Article 21, the right to life and liberty. But the court pushed back, saying the Najib ruling isn't some mechanical rule you can just apply automatically.
So for people in central roles, the delay isn't enough on its own.
Not on its own. And crucially, the court also pointed out that the defense team itself was partly responsible for some of the procedural delays during the charge framing. That kind of weakened their argument that the state was deliberately stalling the trial.
I think the most controversial part of this, though, is how the court defined a terrorist act under Section 15 of the UAPA. I mean, how do you get from a road blockade to an act of terror? That feels like a massive leap.
It's a profound legal shift. The defense argued based on a principle called ejusdem generis.
Which basically means of the same kind, right?
Exactly. So they're saying, look, Section 15 lists things like bombs, firearms, explosives. So the catch-all phrase, any other means, must refer to something similarly violent or destructive, not just, a protest that blocks a road.
But the Supreme Court completely rejected that.
Completely. They sided with the prosecution, establishing a new precedent. Acts that cause a sustained choking of arterial roads and systemic disruption of civic life can be considered terrorism if they threaten economic security or disrupt essential services.
And the timing was a major factor.
The timing was critical. The court specifically noted that because these blockades were timed to coincide with a major international event, President Trump's visit in 2020, it prima facie constitutes an act of terror. The intent to cause disruption at that specific moment was seen as terroristic.
As advocate Vrinda Grover said, that's a grave departure. It sets a really dangerous precedent for organized dissent.
It does. And for the 5 who did get bail, the conditions are incredibly strict. It's more like parole. They have a personal bond of 2 lakh rupees. They can't leave the capital. And they're banned from attending any gatherings or circulating any material until the trial is over.
So a complete judicial muzzle.
Essentially, yes. And for Khalid and Imam, the window to reapply for bail is very narrow. They have to wait until either the protected witnesses have been examined or 1 year passes, whichever comes first. Given the pace, a year seems more likely.
All right, let's shift back to U.S. policy for a moment, but this time on the climate front. We're looking at what seems to be a total dismantling of America's commitment to international climate frameworks.
The scale is huge. President Trump signed a memorandum to withdraw the U.S. from 66 different international organizations. And the 2 big ones on that list for climate are the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the FCCC, and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC.
So let's break that down. The U.S. was already pulling out of the Paris Agreement. What does leaving the FCCC, the parent body, actually do?
Well, leaving the FCCC is the final step. It takes the U.S. out of the entire legal and diplomatic architecture. The rules of the convention state that if you leave the parent body, you are legally considered to have withdrawn from all its protocols.
So that cements the Paris Agreement withdrawal.
It cements it and goes further. The U.S. no longer participates in the FCCC's reporting system for tracking emissions, and they lose their seat at the negotiating table at the annual COP meetings. They can attend, but only as an observer with very little influence.
And that must have a huge financial impact, not just globally, but for U.S. companies, too.
It creates this dual instability. Globally, the FCCC oversees the Green Climate Fund and the Global Environment Facility. By leaving, the U.S. loses its say in how that money is governed, and it makes it politically very easy for the administration to just stop paying its contributions.
Random businesses back home.
For them, the cost of doing climate business goes up. It creates massive policy volatility, investors get nervous and demand higher risk premiums, and U.S. exporters become much more vulnerable to things like carbon tariffs from the EU or other major trading partners who are still in the game.
Okay, and what about pulling out of the IPCC? That's the science body, the one that provides the reference points for all the policy decisions.
Right. Withdrawing weakens the U.S. government's ability to officially own that shared science. Now, the IPCC reports are based on global research, but the author teams are nominated by governments. If the U.S. stops nominating scientists, that pipeline of official U.S. expertise narrows.
But U.S. scientists can still contribute, right?
Oh, absolutely. They can still be expert reviewers, which is a massive role, and they can be nominated through non-government channels. So the scientific input won't disappear, but the official government stamp of approval on that science is gone.
So what's the bottom line for the global climate effort? These talks depend on trust, on reciprocity.
And that's the fundamental problem. When a wealthy, high-emitting country just walks away, it shatters that trust. It gives poorer countries, who are already deeply skeptical of financial promises from rich nations, the political cover to slow down their own climate action. And the timing is just terrible.
Because the conversation has moved on from that old $100 billion goal.
Exactly. We now know the real need is much, much bigger. Adaptation alone could cost up to $365 billion a year by 2035. The new goal is at least $300 billion a year. With the U.S. out, getting other major economies to step up becomes exponentially harder. They'll just ask, why should we pay when a major historical polluter won't?
All right, from these huge global frameworks, let's zoom into something incredibly small. To the quantum world, and specifically the brilliance of diamond defects. It's a paradox, isn't it? For a physicist, a perfect diamond is kind of boring.
It is. It's the broken ones, the ones with flaws that hold all the potential. And we're talking about a specific flaw called the nitrogen vacancy center, or NV center.
And that's just a tiny mistake in the diamond structure.
A very precise mistake.
Yeah.
A diamond is a perfect lattice of carbon atoms. An NV center is when one of those carbon atoms is replaced by a nitrogen atom and the spot right next to it just empty. A vacancy. That tiny flaw is the foundation for a whole new generation of quantum sensors.
So what is it about that specific broken state that makes it so valuable?
The NV center acts like a single electron spin that's perfectly trapped inside a solid cage. The spin is like a tiny magnetic arrow. And the diamond lattice, that cage, is the key. It shields the spin from all the noise in the environment, from heat, from magnetic fields.
And that protection allows it to maintain its quantum state for longer.
It maintains what's called coherence. Coherence is just how long the system can hold its fragile quantum information before the outside world scrambles it. And the diamond is an amazing shield.
The big practical advantage of that, I imagine, is portability.
Exactly right. Most quantum experiments need these enormous, complex refrigerators to cool things down to almost absolute zero to see any quantum effects. But because the diamond does such a good job of shielding the NV center, it holds its quantum state even at room temperature.
So you can build devices you can actually carry around.
You can. Things like high-precision medical scanners or tools that can map brain activity by detecting its incredibly weak magnetic fields, or sensors that can find tiny cracks in metal without having to break it open.
And it's surprisingly simple to read the information out.
It's very elegant. You shine a green laser on it, and the center glows red. And the brightness of that red light tells you the state of the spin. You can literally read the quantum information. Now, the problem has always been, if you pack too many of these NV centers together, their magnetic fields all interact and create chaos. That noise usually destroys the signal.
But some new research published in Nature Physics has, well, completely flipped that on its head. They used the chaos.
They turned the nuisance into the power source. They took a diamond and packed it with an incredible number of NV centers, about 9 trillion of them, and put it inside a superconducting microwave cavity. Then they zapped it with a microwave pulse to energize all those spins.
And instead of just getting a quick flash of light,
Instead of a quick flash, which is called superradiance, the centers started pulsing continuously, emitting a steady stream of microwave light for up to a millisecond. In quantum physics, a millisecond is an eternity. They had created a laser for microwaves.
and it was powered by the very noise that was supposed to kill the signal. How did that bucket brigade mechanism work?
It's so counterintuitive. Think of it like this. When one group of spins releases its energy as light, it becomes tired. Normally, that's the end of it. But because the diamond was so densely packed, those tired spins were surrounded by other energetic spins that hadn't fired yet.
Okay.
Through these tiny magnetic interactions, literally one tiny magnet pushing on another, the energetic spins would instantly pass their energy over to the tired ones, refilling them. It's like a human chain passing buckets of water to a fire. This constant internal relay is what kept the light pulsing continuously.
So this is a huge deal, not just for building better sensors, but for understanding fundamental physics.
That's the big picture, yes. As Wenzel Kirsten, one of the researchers, said, this is a big step in understanding these complex many-body quantum systems. And these systems could become ultra-stable frequency sources, which are vital for things like quantum computing, precision sensing, and incredibly accurate timekeeping. It's a profound lesson. Sometimes the most powerful feature isn't in perfection, but in a well-controlled flaw.
From controlled flaws to the much less controlled flaws in Karnataka's economic landscape. Let's talk about the Bengaluru problem, this incredible concentration of economic power in one city and the dark side that comes with it.
The numbers are just staggering. Bengaluru accounts for 43% of the entire state's GSDP. But all that success has come with crumbling infrastructure, overwhelmed civic services, and a cost of living that is just becoming unsustainable for many.
And we heard that story about Mayor Shetty, the CEO of Black Frog Technologies, who specifically chose not to build his company in Bengaluru.
It's a perfect example. He built his medical device company in Manipal because the cost, the traffic, the rents in Bengaluru were just prohibitive. He chose a different city for a better quality of life and for business stability.
This is the situation that led the Karnataka Digital Economy Mission, or KDIM, to launch its Beyond Bengaluru mission back in 2021. So what was their core strategy?
It all came down to one problem: talent migration. You have these Tier 2 cities, Mysuru, Mangaluru, Hubli, Tharu, Belagavi, that have great universities and produce a lot of talent. But that talent almost always leaves for Bengaluru because that's where the jobs are.
So the idea was to reverse that flow.
Exactly. The chairman of KDIM, B.V. Naidu, put it perfectly. Instead of forcing the talent to move to the industry, let's bring the industry to the talent.
And they're using a hub-and-spoke model to do it.
That's right. Bengaluru is still the main hub, but these other cities are being developed as strategic spokes or clusters. So Mangaluru becomes the hub for the neighboring districts of Udupi and Kudaga. And the government is offering real incentives to make it happen, like land subsidies, which you just can't get in Bengaluru, and booster kits for startups, and global capability centers to help them set up shop.
And have we seen any real progress in the last 4 years? Is it working?
There is genuine momentum, even if it's a bit slow. They've brought in 138 new companies, seen 35 expansions, and created over 9,000 jobs in these clusters. And you're seeing big names test the waters. IBM is expanding in Mysuru, and companies like EG and Bose have set up GCCs in Mangaluru. That shows big corporations are starting to buy in.
Mangaluru, the Silicon Beach of India, really seems to be the big success story so far. What did they get right?
A lot of credit goes to local industry leaders like Rohit Pak. They knew they had to fix the foundational problems that scared investors away in the past, things like unstable power and poor internet. They focused on building high-quality infrastructure first.
And the results followed.
They really did. Mangaluru's IT workforce has grown from about 15,000 people generating 3,300 crore rupees in 2023 to around 27,000 people generating over 4,500 crore now. And crucially, you're seeing successful startup exits companies like Novigo and Robosoft being acquired. That sends a powerful signal to the VC world that this is a mature, sustainable ecosystem.
But despite that success, there are still some major hurdles. Funding seems to be a big one, and the strange proximity problem in Mysuru.
The funding ecosystem outside Bengaluru is practically a desert. One entrepreneur said that the moment venture capitalists hear your startup is from Mysuru, a lot of them just switch off. Government grants help, but they're often not enough for a really disruptive, high-growth company.
And what about that proximity issue? How can being close to Bengaluru be a problem?
It's a strange paradox. Because Mysuru is so close, companies ask themselves, why should I open a whole new center there when I can just commute or easily bring talent from Mysuru to Bengaluru? It's not far enough away to force decentralization. And the other issue is bureaucracy. The single-window approval system is still effectively run out of Bengaluru, which slows everything down.
So the mission is working, but it needs some serious structural changes to really take off.
Precisely. The officials are optimistic, but they know it's a long game. KDIM's role is now to act as this buffer between industry and the bureaucracy, trying to smooth out those hurdles. And initiatives like Orange Bunny, come back to the homeland, have successfully brought some talent back. So the core idea is sound. It just needs more time and sustained political will.
Okay, moving from economic conflict to a very different kind of conflict. One over culture, religion, and land. Let's look at the complex situation at Thirupparankundram Hill near Madurai. This is a site of incredible religious syncretism.
It's a remarkable place. It's the most important of Lord Murugan's 6 abodes. But the hill is also home to the Subramanya Swami Temple, ancient Jain beds, and the Hazrat Sultan Sikandar Badusha Dargah. But all that fusion has also created a lot of tension and a history of legal battles going back over a century.
And the legal foundation for all this goes back to a 1931 Privy Council ruling, right? What did that establish?
That 1931 ruling is key. It vested ownership of the hill with the temple management, stating that the unoccupied parts belonged to the Hindus, But, and this is crucial, it also explicitly protected the existence of the Dargah and the steps leading up to it. So it created this permanent legal fault line. It defined ownership but guaranteed coexistence.
The current conflict is about lighting the ceremonial lamp, the Deepam, on a stone pillar during a festival. It seems like a simple ritual. Why did the government oppose it?
The state government was worried about law and order, given the Dargah's presence nearby. They also claimed there wasn't enough historical proof that that specific pillar was the traditional spot for the lamp. Essentially, they wanted to avoid anything that could be seen as a provocation.
But Justice G.R. Swaminathan, in his December 2025 ruling, came down hard in favor of the petitioners. What was his reasoning?
His reasoning went beyond just religious freedom. It was about protecting property title. He cited that 1931 ruling and said the temple had an obligation to perform a regular and periodic assertion of title. Lighting the lamp wasn't just a ritual. It was a legal act to prevent their claim to the land from being weakened over time through non-use or encroachment.
And when the authorities didn't comply, it led to some serious judicial drama.
It really did. A contempt petition was filed, and Justice Swaminathan actually authorized the petitioner to go up the hill with CISF protection to light the lamp. But the local police blocked them, citing prohibitory orders. The judge's response was incredibly strong. He basically said that officials can't just cite vague law and order concerns as an excuse to defy a direct court order.
And a division bench ultimately upheld that order.
Yes, they did. They dismissed the government's fears of public disturbance as an imaginary ghost. They pointed out that the pillar is on temple property and that a 1994 court order already allowed for the lamp to be lit as long as it was at least 15 meters away from the Dargah. The government, however, says it's going to appeal to the Supreme Court.
This whole issue of managing rituals is so complex. There was separate litigation about the Dargah's practices too, particularly animal sacrifice.
That case shows how tangled the history is. A 2025 verdict was split. One judge said animal sacrifice was a traditional ritual, but another judge upheld a statutory ban because the hill is a protected monument under the Archaeological Survey of India. The tiebreaker judge agreed that the ASI status was the deciding factor.
So the final ruling was quite restrictive.
Very. The Dargah can only conduct one specific festival, with participation limited to 50 people, and there's an explicit ban on any animal sacrifice or non-vegetarian food on the hill. The courts are getting into the business of micromanaging rituals based on statutory law.
And all of this has spilled over into the political arena.
It certainly has. We saw 107 NDA bloc MPs submit a letter seeking an impeachment motion against Justice Swaminathan himself. That move was immediately condemned by former judges as a political attempt to intimidate the judiciary after an unfavorable ruling. It just shows how deeply intertwined politics, religion, and law have become in this contested space.
Let's move now to our magazine section and look at Silicon Valley. It feels like it's at this really intense crossroads right now. You have this completely unconstrained AI revolution happening at the same time as political borders are tightening. The anxiety for immigrant workers must be immense.
It's palpable. The source mentions an employee at ByteDance, Nishant Agarwal, who talks about having to practice self-censorship at work. It's a direct result of the political climate, things like higher H-1B fees, slower visa renewals. You have this fundamental conflict. The Valley needs global talent to fuel the AI boom, but U.S. immigration policy is actively making it harder to get that talent.
And a huge source of that anxiety is AI's very real impact on jobs. Agarwal said that entry-level jobs have just completely disappeared.
It's a structural shift. You have companies like Apple using AI agents as interns. They're optimizing those entry-level roles out of existence. If you put numbers on it, Indian workers are about 20 to 25% of the high-tech workforce in the Valley. That's about 50,000 people. Maybe 30% of those are in roles like routine maintenance that are highly exposed to automation. So you're looking at around 15,000 skilled Indians whose jobs are at substantial risk.
And this threat to existing jobs is happening at the same time that the pipeline for new talent is being squeezed by these policy changes.
The impact is clear. A survey of over 800 U.S. universities showed a 17% drop in new international student enrollment, and 96% of those universities said it was because of visa anxieties. The drop is sharpest among Indian students, so much so that for the first time in years, more students from China have entered the country than from India.
That's a historic shift.
It is, and there's a key cultural difference. Historically, Indian talent comes to the U.S. to stay, to build a life. Chinese students often return home. So this shift could have long-term implications for the talent pool.
And this internal pressure is being compounded by really fierce global competition, especially for the big Indian consulting firms.
The global competition is intense. Places like Dubai and Abu Dhabi are pouring money into attracting AI talent. And China has a massive state-directed national AI program. Within the valley itself, the pressure is on firms like Infosys and TCS. Their business model often relies on performing routine system maintenance. As companies pivot their budgets to AI, those routine tasks are the first things to be automated.
But the silver lining here, for individuals at least, seems to be reinvention. The only way forward is to aggressively reskill in AI.
It is the only path. A manager at Microsoft confirmed their mandate is clear. They are only doing targeted hiring for AI skills, and every single employee is now expected to use AI agents in their work. The first draft of code is often written by AI now, so for skilled Indians, this is a moment of truth. Their resilience means this is a huge opportunity to lead the transformation, but only if they can reskill fast enough.
And this American approach, this focus on speed and scale above all else, is very different from what we see in Europe.
That's a critical point. The U.S. philosophy is basically, if something works, it will find its place. There are very few regulatory guardrails at the start. Europe is the opposite. It prioritizes ethics and safety, asking what should be built before building it. The future, as the source suggests, probably lies in bridging those two realities, valuing Europe's instinct to pause and govern, while harnessing America's urgency to move fast.
For our final deep dive, we're going back in time to look at the political and economic origins of the Indian caste system. And the source material here makes a really bold argument about what it is not based on.
It's a revolutionary take. The argument is that the system did not originate from ideas of religious purity and pollution, or from racial differences, or from the British census. All that came much, much later. The actual origin, it argues, is rooted in ancient political power struggles and pure economic necessity.
So where do we see the very first embryonic mention of this four-tiered social structure?
The earliest reference is in the Purusha Sukta, which is a hymn that was probably a late addition to the Rig Veda. But the system itself really began to form around 1000 BCE after a huge conflict called the Battle of the Ten Kings. The Kuru tribe won, consolidated power, and the center of Vedic civilization shifted eastward to Kurukshetra.
And with that new unified kingdom, they needed a unified religious canon.
Exactly. Before then, the Rig Vedic hymns were like personal or clan property. To merge them all into one common tradition, you needed a professional class of people, an oral agency, because writing didn't exist, whose only job was to memorize, sing, and preserve this new, unified canon for the entire kingdom.
So the need for this professional priest class created the very first caste, the Brahmanas.
That is the core of the argument. The families who owned the song collections became the Gotras. And to keep this knowledge exclusive from professional, they created new marriage rules. You had to marry outside your own lineage, but only within the small group of about 50 Gotras that controlled the religious canon. This act of social engineering created the Brahmanas as one out of many. They were the first and perhaps only Varna created at a specific time, in a specific place, for a specific political purpose.
That completely reframes the debate. It wasn't about divine purity, it was about political and religious control.
It shifts the model from what the sociologist Louis Dumont called homo hierarchicus man driven by hierarchy and purity to homo opportunisticus man driven by political power and opportunity. If the Brahmanas were created for political convenience, then there was no initial purity pollution concept. And it wasn't based on race, because the top three, Varnas, Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaisya, were all considered Arya. The Kshatriya was just whoever held power, and the Vaisya was everybody else.
And to make this political arrangement seem natural and permanent, later texts had to build an ideology around it.
They did. They started mapping everything in the universe, gods, animals, seasons, onto this four-Varna system to make an arbitrary social structure feel sacred and natural. But this faced immediate and fierce resistance from the Sramanic religions like Buddhism and Jainism, which rejected Vedic authority and accepted people from all classes.
And the final piece of the puzzle, the thing that spread this system across the whole subcontinent, was a massive economic shift.
Precisely. Around 235 CE, world trade collapsed. This shifted prosperity permanently towards agriculture. And to expand agriculture on that scale, you needed millions of non-family laborers, often from forest-dwelling or nomadic groups. New kingdoms, even non-Hindu ones, found this hereditary hierarchy incredibly useful for organizing this vast new labor force.
And how did they implement it so widely?
Kings across the subcontinent adopted the framework to give legitimacy to their new agro-based states. They invited Brahmanas from Aryavarta to settle on granted lands, and this established the two core principles of the system everywhere. First, a fundamental alliance between the rulers and the priests, and second, what Ambedkar called an ascending scale of reverence and a descending scale of contempt. The system was a product of political and economic power, not some immutable destiny.
What an incredible set of sources, moving from the tiny quantum spin of a diamond and the structure of DNA to the outsourcing of diplomacy and the historical origins of massive social structures. The underlying thread connecting these 8 articles really seems to be the force of power and structure, whether it's political lobbying defining diplomatic access, judicial structures defining the boundary of dissent, or ancient kingdoms structuring society based on economic opportunity. Here is a final provocative thought for you to take away, connecting the historical contingency we just discussed with the technological future we are rapidly building. Considering the caste system originated from a politically convenient solution to an economic and religious need in the ancient world, how might the rapid, unregulated, and politically charged advancement of AI today create entirely new, politically convenient social hierarchies, digital varnas, that we fail to recognize until centuries later? Thank you for listening. If you want to provide suggestions, please contact on the Twitter handle given in the episode description. As always, we're eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.